the story began. We met in 1977. We both were divorced and we began dating. After several months, as we discovered so many interests in common, I asked Harville what his dream future might look like. Since he was leaving his teaching job at Southern Methodist University's Perkins School of Theology and had no specific plans going forward, he shared with me a few options he was considering, and one was to write a book. I asked him what the focus of the book would be, and he said, "I'm curious. Why do couples fight? Why does the dream become a nightmare?" I began to ask him what he thought was the answer, and a conversation grew out of that evening, with each of us helping to finish each other's sentences. This continued throughout our dating years, and 6 years after we married, the manuscript Getting the Love You Want, A Guide for Couples was finished and then published in 1988. Harville and I have continued to talk about couples theory most days in our lives, the 40-plus years we've known each other.
As we have reflected upon how we co-created imago theory and therapy, I discovered a basic and productive complementarity. Helen is right brain dominant, which means she accesses information through her feelings and senses, intuits subtle qualities, and sees the connections. I am left brain dominant, which means I access information through observation and logical thinking and construct wholes out of parts. Helen is the creative source, and I the architect and contractor. Between us, raw content derived through these different mental operations has been transformed into the publication of 10 books on intimate relationships, a global organization of imago therapists, imago educators, plus relational social activists who are zealously committed to healing couples and creating a relational culture. Even though we are co-creators of imago theory for over 40 years in all its forms, my name was the only one on the book, so I was considered its sole author. And since I was the solo imago professional trainer and couples workshop presenter for the first 10 years after publication, I was seen by the public as sole creator of imago relationship therapy. When a brand is established with high-profile status, it gets quite solidified in public opinion. Although Helen was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame for her work in the women's movement, her motivation was helping women have equal voices in society, but to also have equal relationships at home. While I was a marriage therapist in the office, we both saw Helen as being a marriage therapist in the culture. Couples had been her sole calling a decade before we met. After we became partners, creating, developing, and teaching imago ideas was clearly a part of her DNA. And while we won't go into too many details here, we will summarize by saying people logically saw me as the creator of imago and Helen in the shadows as my supportive partner. Over the years, as our children were leaving home and our marriage became more connected, Helen turned fully to what she really loves to do professionally and began to regularly co-lead couples workshops, co-present at national and international conferences, and co-author books and articles on imago relationship therapy. Then a series of serendipitous things began to happen that led to a profound awareness. Our issue was an instance of a world historical problem, the historical second-class status of women and the unconscious bias against women's equality, and both Helen and I were unconsciously complicit in it.
Here's one way we moved to consciousness. I published a book called And the Spirit Moved Them through the feminist press. It is about a group of women whose contributions to the origin of the women's movement in the United States were omitted. My book restores them to their rightful place in early feminist history.